Hello, and welcome to 5-Minute Math. Today we are looking at the 7th grade concept of inequalities, specifically how we can represent inequalities on a number line when we have a negative coefficient, and we'll do it in 5 minutes or less. So we have a basic inequality here, and the coefficient, remember that's the number that multiplies by a variable or an unknown in a mathematical sentence or mathematical expression, and it's going to be -4. So does that -4 make any impact on this inequality when we solve for x, or even its representation? Well, we are going to find out what happens when that number outside that's multiplying by our x is actually a negative rather than a positive. First, we need to isolate the variable. Let's get x all by itself. So we're going to use our properties of equality. We're going to act like this is an equation rather than an inequality. We're going to do what we would do to get that x all by itself. So right now, let's take a look at our PEMDAS, right? We're going to kind of use our inverse of our PEMDAS to figure out how do we isolate that variable. We start from the bottom, we move our way up. And on that x side, I do see an addition and subtraction is that subtraction. So let's attack that first. And so we're going to use our properties of equality, which means we're going to do the same thing to both sides of our inequality to keep it balanced. And if we have a -5, we need to do the inverse. So that's going to be a +5. So if I add 5 to both sides, that will maintain a balanced inequality. So that's going to cancel out. I'm going to end up with a -4x, 19 plus 5. That's going to give me 24. And hopefully you see how that's going to divide. Nice, whole numbers. So there's no addition left, but there is a multiplication left. So it's a -4. This is where our negative coefficient comes in. All right. So if we have a -4x, what we need to do is we need to divide, inverse operation. We're going to divide by -4, because -4 divided by -4 gets me a +1. And if we were to divide -4 by +4, we'd get a -x, and we don't want a -x, we want a +x. So I need to divide both sides by my -4. Now watch what happens here. X, right? -4, -4, that cancels out. 24 divided by 4 is 6, but since it's a -4, it's going to be -6. But since I divided this x side by a negative, same thing happens if you multiply by a negative. If you multiply or divide by a negative, it actually flips my inequality. Take a look at that. It's now x is less than -6. So I'm going to show my -6. It's going to be an open circle. And then I'm going to make it go this way. Now, how do we know that? Because that seems weird. Why would we flip it? Well, that's just what happens when you divide or multiply with a negative coefficient. The best way to do it to see whether we're right or not is test it out, okay? So we're not going to use -6 because that's, we're not including -6, but let's use a number less than -6. So let's use -7, and let's plug that in back here. So -4 is -7 minus 5 greater than 19. So -4 times -7 is 28 minus 5 is greater than 19. So that's 23 is greater than 19. That's true. So this is a true solution here. So to test it, let's see what happens if we do a positive number. Let's do something easy. Let's do 1. It's outside of the solution set. What happens if we do this 1? Well, -4 times 1 is going to be less than 5, greater than 19. Look what happens right here. I've got -4 times 1, +1. We're testing something outside of the solution set. It's going to be -4 minus 5. And you're going to notice that those just combine to -9. Definitely that is not true. So it is something that we have to remember when we are multiplying or dividing, trying to isolate a variable, and we're dealing with inequalities. Doesn't matter if we're dealing with an equal sign, because an equal sign is always an equal sign. If you multiply or divide with a negative coefficient in order to isolate that variable, you flip your inequality.